Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Christa Carmen.
And this is
Murder Coaster.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today we bring you a wild story of two brothers and their dramatic roller coaster rise to the top of the world and their horrible crash down to the bottom. A tale of sex, drugs, murder, and skateboarding. Unhinged anarchy and mayhem, rivalries gone violently astray, addiction and abuse, and death-defying tricks of insanity. Strap in, for today we cover the Pappas brothers and the tragic death of Lynette Phillips.
Let's begin. Prologue. The Body in the River. On March 3rd, 2007, the body of a young blonde woman was discovered in the Yarra River in Abbotsford, Australia, jammed along the edge of a concrete dam. Her body was wrapped in a quilt and weighted down with a backpack containing 2 4-kilogram dumbbells. An autopsy determined that she had been strangled and beaten to death.
The body was soon discovered to be that of 27-year-old Lynette Phillips, a pretty and bright college student who'd long struggled with heroin addiction.
The last person seen with her was her former boyfriend, Benjamin Pappas, who'd once been ranked the number 2 skateboarder in the world, his brother Tas holding the number 1 rank.
Both of the brothers had suffered a dramatic fall from grace. Benjamin had been busted smuggling 100 grams of cocaine into Australia. Tas had been blacklisted from the X Games after a long series of drug-fueled feuds, first with his longtime rival Tony Hawk, and then a dramatic falling out with his team members on platinum skateboards.
When informed of his girlfriend's death by a friend, Benjamin broke down in tears and exclaimed,
No, what if I've done something stupid?
Benjamin claimed to have been in a Xanax and heroin blackout the night Lynette went missing, waking up on a park bench with no memory of anything.
And Xanax can do that to you. Benjamin quickly became the sole suspect when the quilt, backpack, and dumbbells found on Lynette's body were determined to have belonged to him, and police issued a statewide bulletin to locate him for questioning.
8 days later, the body of Benjamin Pappas, once the number 2 ranked skateboarder in the world and an Australian hero, was discovered floating in Victoria Harbour in Docklands, the victim of an apparent suicide.
The skateboarding community was shocked. His brother Tas stated, "Me and my brother didn't stand a chance."
This is their story.
Chapter 1. Bogans from the Suburbs.
Micah Pappas, or Tas as he was called, was born in 1975 in Melbourne, Australia, to Greek-Australian father Bill, who worked for a finance company, and Australian mother Kerry, who was a caterer.
3 years later, on May 13th, 1978, his brother Benjamin James Pappas, or Ben, was born.
The brothers grew up in the northwestern suburb of St. Albans.
It was very chaotic, a violent and dysfunctional family. As Tuss would say, it was pretty hectic as far as Mom and Dad were concerned. Mom was young, she was a party girl. She would be into drinking and partying, and Dad just wanted to have a normal home life, and that's what all the fights were about.
Tragically, at a very young age, Tas was sexually abused. He'd later recall the incident, saying,
I was sexually abused by my auntie's friend when I was like 5 or 6 years old. My auntie Vicky lived with us, and there was some prick who came around and ended up sexually abusing me. Fucking pedo. At the same time, I was wet in the bed, and the parents were fighting, and I had this babysitter who would rip me out of the bed by the hair and bash me around because I'd wet the bed and shit. We were hurting as kids from a lot of the fights we saw. I always felt like I just wanted to get out of where I live. I wanted to prove myself. I ended up having what felt like a chip on my shoulder because of it all. I just wanted to become something.
Soon afterwards, their mother, Carrie, abandoned the family, and Bill was left to raise the boys on his own.
Tas describes himself and his brother as bogans, an Australian slang term he says translates into heshers or white trash. They were little hooligan wild childs, hanging out in construction sites and getting into rock fights with other kids, smashing out windows, setting abandoned cars on fire, just causing trouble. As Tas says, we just started pumping and didn't give a fuck.
They studied martial arts with their Uncle Willie, who had a jiu-jitsu school, and he taught them death strokes, how to go for the eyes, the ears, the chin, the throat.
Before a fight, Uncle Willie would say to them, this is some pretty fucked up shit here. Right, now imagine this. You walk in and some bloke is raping your mother. Now what you gonna do to that guy? Now, spar!
Then one day, the two little hooligans stumbled over the Praran skate park in Melbourne, and their lives were changed forever. As Tas says,
I saw the vert ramp and was mesmerized that people could fly through the air.
Tas was only 12, his brother 9, and they dove head into the world of skateboarding.
Other skaters at the time laughed at them as they really couldn't skate, couldn't drop in on the ramp. They'd have to start at the bottom, slowly learning to pump, only getting halfway up the transition. But the brothers were undaunted. They progressed quickly, and within a couple weeks were starting from the top of the ramp and dropping right in.
They were soon consumed with the culture of skateboarding, Tas saying,
We bonded with anyone who could skate, and were complete pricks to anyone who couldn't.
They'd watch skate videos constantly. Powell Peralta was the king at that time, putting out videos like The Bones Brigade, Future Primitive, and The Search for Animal Chin, with their skaters Tony Hawk, Lance Mountain, Steve Caballero, and Mike McGill.
But the young Pappas brothers quickly decided they didn't like these mainstream skaters, who they saw as lame pretty boys. They were into the H Street videos, the new gen style, and were particularly taken with the style of Danny Way, who became their hero.
Like the Pappas brothers, Danny Way had grown up in an abusive and troubled home. His father hanged himself in jail when Danny was just an infant, and Danny had found both an outlet for his troubles and a means of escape in surfing and skateboarding from a very young age. He started skateboarding at just 6 years old, won his first contest at 11, and at 15 he became the youngest person to ever win a ramp riding competition.
The brothers dreamed of going to America to skate, to be part of the United States skateboard culture they watched on videos. They pushed each other hard, battling in a sibling rivalry way, always trying to go harder and fly farther than the other.
As you may remember from our episode on professional skater and murderer Gator last year, a case strikingly similar to this one, in the late 80s and early 90s, ramp skating, or vert, was considered dead. It was now all about street skating. For Gator, this had been a nail in the coffin of his career, as he couldn't ollie, couldn't kickflip, could only ride a ramp.
But the Pappas brothers were just as good on the street as they were on the ramp, and they began to incorporate street tricks into their vert riding, ollieing and kick-flipping on half-pipes. As Tuss puts it, "We added street to the vert and knew when to do it. You see, the old school guys had trouble doing a 540 because they would scrape their tail into the vert, but we'd do it like a street ollie."
They were innovative and tearing it up, and people were noticing.
One day they noticed a black Porsche parked beside the halfpipe. Two men inside watching them, who happened to be Stephen and Peter Hill, the biggest skateboard distributors in Australia, and owners of Hardcore Entertainment and a huge skate shop called Glow. As Tuss says, "Lucky we didn't get lippy with them, eh?"
Stephen and Peter sponsored them, giving them helmets, pads, decks, trucks, all the gear they could want. Then the Australian Ramp Riot skateboarding contest came, and they were on the tour. It was a wild time for the two youths. As Tuss says,
"We were the Groms on the first skateboard tour. We were in the team van when these guys were talking about all the coke they were doing and smoking bongs and drinking. But we didn't chop the drugs. Ben would have been 12 or less, and I would have been 14, 15.
They're getting paid, and Tuss was working as well, diligently saving every penny, with the dream of moving to the United States and joining the flourishing skateboarding culture and beating pretty boy Tony Hawk. And at 17 years old, he dropped out of Kings Park High School and took off on a plane to Tampa, Florida.
Chapter 2. The U.S. of A. In Florida, Tuss moves into the Tampa Skate Park, a huge warehouse where he literally lives under the halfpipe in what they call the Charlie Brown House, a yellow room with a black zigzag across the walls, just like the iconic shirt worn by the Peanuts character.
He perfects a number of mind-blowing tricks, which he performs flawlessly back-to-back in the Mad Circle skate video, Let the Horns Blow, which instantly puts him on the map as an up-and-coming skater, gaining a crazy reputation as he'd done it all high on acid.
It's so crazy how LSD is such a part of so many of our stories. And I swear, it's not planned.
He also got into cocaine, saying,
"I saw this white powder and said, 'What's this then, eh? Oh, it makes you skate better? Then give me loads of that.'"
Tuss breaks his femur, but that doesn't stop him at all. He's right back at it, and Mad Circle puts out an advertisement with an x-ray of his femur, complete with metal plates and screws, with the tagline, "Tas Pappas, Mad Circle's answer to the Bionic Man."
Back in Melbourne, Ben was working hard at becoming a world-class skater as well. And 2 years later, he too heads out to the United States, to Tampa, Florida, to meet his brother.
Now these two crazies are in America. They have this kind of baby-faced thug look, like little hooligans. Their heads are shaved. Tuss is missing his front tooth and has Pappas tattooed across his abdomen in Old English letters. They just scream bad boys.
As local Tampa skate pro Lance Conklin would say, everyone was wondering, who the fuck are these guys?
Tuss is the louder, more rambunctious older brother, Ben the quieter one. But they're both wild as can be, and they begin to refer to themselves as Barnes and Elias after the rival sergeants in platoon. As Tuss says,
"Different in attitude and approach, perhaps, but equally deadly."
Tuss and Ben begin touring the world, going to skateboarding competitions, placing in the contests, and then getting third and fourth place in competitions, getting new sponsors. working their way up, meeting their hero Danny Way, and becoming friends with him.
And in 1995, skateboarding reached a new level when ESPN decides to create an international gathering of what they call, quote, action sports athletes, end quote. And they name it the X Games.
But Tas was immediately skeptical of all of it, thinking the glamour and hype were counter to the rough and tumble punk rock street origins of skateboarding, saying,
ESPN and the nerdy types wanted everything to come from the same cookie cutter. People like Tony Hawk were playing it up to be the good boy mold. We were like, oh shit, are we supposed to act this way now? We couldn't make the transition. We wanted to rock and roll.
Then in May of 1995, the X Games trials started in Rhode Island, and Tas had his first confrontation with Tony Hawk. As he explains it,
Danny Way told me at the first X Games that Tony Hawk used to crank call his mom. I'd become friends with Danny Way's mom, and I saw him and I'm like, hey, Hawk, what's this shit you used to fucking crank call Danny Way's mom? You're a fucking dick, mate. Come outside, you prick. Don't be a fucking pussy, let's have a crack. Fucking crank calling people's moms. And he was like, oh, and he shits a brick. That was the first incident that made me and Hawk not be mates.
Chapter 2, California Dreaming. With the success of the X Games, vert skating was back with a vengeance, and it was the ramp riders that became the real rock stars of the skateboarding game.
So, in June of 1995, the Pappas brothers moved to California to be with their friend Danny Way, moving right into his house in San Diego.
It was a wild time. During the day, they challenged and pushed each other to the extreme, literally changing the face of skateboarding by combining the tricks and styles of street skating with vertical ramp riding. And at night, they partied hard, really hard, living the rockstar lifestyle. Tons of cocaine was involved.
Danny starts platinum skateboards, and of course, Tas and Ben are on the team. But of course, the Pappas brothers are causing waves, as was their way.
Tommy Caudill, who was partners with Danny Way, calls Tas a natural asshole, saying the first time he hung out with him, Tas took his brand new bag of weed, and kind bud was quite expensive at this time, and had chopped it up and mixed it with tobacco. Tommy was pissed, thought it was disrespectful, and asked him what the fuck he thought he was doing. Tas just smiled that missing tooth grin at him, saying,
That's a mole, mate. It's now 1996, and the Pappas brothers aren't just placing or coming in third or fourth, but they start winning contests. Tas was now coming in number one sometimes, and actually beating his longtime rival, Tony Hawk, who wasn't really innovating, wasn't flipping his board or incorporating new school street chicks into his ramp riding.
Then Ben started coming into his own and started getting first place as well, 3 in a row at one point, beating both his older brother and Tony Hawk.
Then it just became a rivalry between the brothers to see who could get first place, doing kick flips insanely high in the air and 720s, just pushing each other. And Tony Hawk was now just getting third place, being left in the dust, with the two brothers going back and forth on who's going to be first place in competitions. And the sponsorships are rolling in, and they're now making around $15,000 a month.
The brothers get their own apartment in San Diego, just a block from the beach, and their dad comes out and starts living with them. It was a golden time for the wild and woolly Australian family.
Chapter 3: The World Championship.
On October 6, 1996, the World Championship of Skateboarding was held in Los Angeles.
Ben had strained his back, was stiff and in a lot of pain, and was struggling to land his tricks. So Tas decides he's just gonna go hog wild and does an insane run, doing kick flips 10 feet in the air. But at the end, he has a bad fall and breaks a rib.
But he wasn't worried, for he thinks no one can beat him after giving one hell of a performance.
But Tony Hawk ends up tying him. They both end up with scores of 95.7. Tas can't believe it, and Ben is screaming at the judges that it's rigged.
Tas describes Tony Hawk as a chess player when competing, trying to outmaneuver points by using strategy over skill, innovation, and gusto. Describing how Hawk always does the same routine, 540, 540, grind, and saying,
"When it comes to skating and trying to stay number one, Hawk always has to be the winner. Watch the Bones Brigade doc. He talks about competitions, how cut he gets when he doesn't win. Look, the reason we went after him was there were that many comps where he just did varials and no new tricks, and they gave it to him anyway. So at the World Championship, I figured, what have I got to lose? I already got a broken rib. If I didn't win, I just wanted to be known as the guy who went completely ballistic."
He's doing insane airs, just skyrocketing into the air. Then he does a fakie 540 to fakie, one of the hardest tricks you can do. Going backwards up the ramp, launching into the air, and spinning 1.5 times as the skateboard simultaneously also spins 1.5 times, then landing backwards again.
And Tas won. He was the winner of the World Championship and was now ranked the greatest skateboarder in the world.
Tony Hawk came up to him afterwards and said, I think I should have won.
And then Ben came out screaming, "Fuck off! All year you've been winning the competitions, and then you say you should have won? Why can't you be happy for someone else? You don't even flip your board. Fuck off, old man. You're over."
Tas was torn. Should he do the right thing and tell his brother to calm down, to be the better man, to show sportsmanship? But where was the loyalty in that? No, they were brothers. So he said,
"Yeah, fuck off, Hawk, you wanker. You can't even flip your board, you old prick."
Now the feud was really on. As Tommy Codell would say, Tas didn't just burn bridges, he completely decimated them until nothing remained. He wouldn't just step on your toes, he'd step on your toes and spit in your face.
The brothers returned to Australia as national heroes, world champions, rock stars. And like rock stars, they partied hard. As Tas would say, "I'd always been like, drugs are just like a cup of tea. They weren't anything. Like if I woke up in the morning and someone said there was a crack rock, there I'd be like, sweet, let's smoke it. I didn't give a shit."
During their time back in Australia as heroes, they appeared wired as hell and off their rockers in interviews. Not the best look, but they were literally the bad boys of the skateboarding world.
Chapter 4, Post-Championship. When Tas returned to San Diego and began skating again, he was in a lot of pain. Something just wasn't right, so he sought medical help.
After full-body x-rays, it was revealed that he had broken his back. The vertebrae had broken off the wings, and his spinal cord was jammed down at the bottom. If he continued to skate, he could become paralyzed. He had to recuperate and build his back up again with a trainer, which he set out to do.
But for Tas, taking a break from skating meant full-time partying, and partying hard. he bought a pound of cocaine. A fucking pound. A brick he kept in his dresser. He'd wake up in the morning, take a razor-sharp Bowie knife, and just scrape it along the top of the brick of cocaine, then snort the dust right off the knife.
Oh my God, that's wild. Right. One night he got pulled over with a bunch of coke, car filled with people, and the cops ask, "What are you up to?"
"Going to skate, mate."
"Yeah, right," the cops say.
"Wanna watch?" Tas then grabbed his board and started showing off for the cops, who let him go. Close call.
Then he fell down a flight of stairs, causing a bone fracture in his eye orbit, and his eye got pushed out the back of the eye socket and got stuck. So he had to undergo surgery where his eye was taken out of his head and a plastic shade put in behind it. Whoa.
Gnarly, man. At the April 1997 Triple Crown of Skateboarding in Las Vegas, Tas got so wasted he didn't even skate the contest, just partied with the crowd. He got so drunk and belligerent, he disrupted the entire contest, throwing out t-shirts while other skateboarders were trying to compete, getting the crowd to chant, "XYZ Platinum Skateboards! XYZ Platinum Skateboards!"
When an organizer tried to get him to stop the chaos, he called her a cunt.
Which, to be fair, is a term of affection and endearment in Australia. Pretty much like dude in California.
Meanwhile, Platinum Skateboards was not doing well. They'd been blowing through money faster than it was coming in, splurging on anything and everything. Then Tas and Ben's dad was accused of embezzling money from Platinum, and they were kicked off the team in a very dramatic fashion.
But they didn't believe it, defended their father, ready to literally fight for him.
It appears there was never any definitive proof that their father had embezzled any money from the company. It may have never happened at all, just been vicious rumors running through a company that was going broke. But it got ugly, real ugly. And at one point, someone even threw a Molotov cocktail at their house. Luckily, the bottle didn't break, just rolled off the roof.
So Ben decided to head back home to Australia.
But in the Melbourne airport, Ben's credit card was discovered to be caked in cocaine, and he's pulled into security, searched, his belongings gone over and x-rayed.
The x-rays revealed strange packages in his shoes, and they find 103 grams of cocaine in the insoles, nearly a quarter pound of cocaine worth approximately $50,000.
Ben Pappas, ranked the number 2 skateboarder in the world, right below his brother, was banned from traveling internationally for 3 years and his passport was seized. The conviction effectively ended his professional skateboarding career as he was no longer able to travel for competitions.
As one friend would say,
"Going from the best in the world to not being able to go abroad to compete was like rock bottom. That would be a spear through the heart pretty much."
Tas says, "I was shattered. My partner in crime was gone. I'm going to be touring the world alone now. Any country I go in, no one's really got my back anymore. It was me and Ben against the world. Now, it's only me."
Chapter 5. The 900.
There's an empty suit of armor propped up in Pa's easy chair, reading Paul's letters to the church as if Paul was still there. Mark hits on her makeup to cover up her plight.
Tas keeps at it, going through physical therapy, strengthening his back, and then trying to be the best skater he can, trying to master a new trick, the 900, spinning a full 2.5 rotations in the air.
The 900 had never been done before by anyone, and Tas figured that if he could pull it off, it would lead to even greater fame and fortune. And perhaps with enough money, he could hire the right lawyers to get his brother back in the States again.
Tas says it was very scary, taking the 540 to a whole new level, basically like a double 540. And if this fearless motherfucker thinks something is scary, you know it must be hardcore.
And he was almost pulling them off, actually landing them, but then bailing from the force of the momentum. But he was so close, and it seemed only a matter of time before he had it down.
Folks from Trans World Skateboarding magazine showed up at the ramp to document his efforts, including Grant Britton, an old school skateboard photographer. Grant was also very good friends with Tony Hawk. In fact, he helped get his career going.
Little did Tas realize that Grant took the video footage to Tony Hawk, who began to study it meticulously.
Then came the 1999 X Games, where Tas planned on revealing the 900 trick in a triumphant return to skateboarding during the Best Trick contest.
But then Tas is told he's not competing in the Best Trick contest.
He's like, what the fuck? I've always been in the Best Trick contest for years. But they just said, sorry, mate. This year you're not in the Best Trick contest.
But Tony Hawk was in it. And guess which trick he was trying to perform? I'll give you a hint. It starts with 9 and ends with 100.
Tas was devastated as he watched Tony Hawk going for it, but never quite landing it.
And then he does it. Tony Hawk stole the trick and performed the very first 900 in the history of skateboarding.
Tony Hawk then exclaimed through the microphone, "This is the best day of my life, I swear to God."
Food stamps in heaven, I hope they take food stamps in heaven, 'cause I was always broke.
Tas later said.
He's been studying my sequences and gone and done the trick on me. The prick. I realized right then what I was up against. It didn't matter how good I was, how close I was to a trick. It was just, stuff ya. Piss off home, Aussie.
It would be the 900 and the subsequent release of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater that turned the Birdman into the megastar he is today.
Chapter 6. Lost Little Ben.
Oh, my good buddy David, I'll roll up a joint. For my good buddy David, I'll show him how Goliath fell getting stoned.
Ben, meanwhile, stuck in Australia, had gotten married, but soon divorced, and he spiraled into a deep depression. He wasn't skating at all and gained a lot of weight, or as they say in Australia, stacked on the kilos.
He got a lot of tattoos, too. He was treated for anxiety and depression and put on a bunch of antidepressants, including Xanax, which is incredibly addictive, but that wasn't enough to cure his depression, and he turned to heroin for solace.
He basically became a transient, staying with friends and family at first, but soon sleeping on park benches, slowly losing all the weight he gained and becoming rail thin as opiate addiction dominated his life.
In March of 2005, he began dating Lynette Phillips, a cute blonde girl 3 years older than him, who was a recovering drug addict herself, studying to be a drug counselor at Swinburne University, and the two moved in together.
As can tragically happen, instead of getting Ben off drugs, Lynette relapsed and fell back into heroin addiction. It was a tumultuous relationship. They'd fight and break up, then get back together again, over and over, a terrible cycle of codependency and addiction.
Back in the States, Tas had settled down with a girl named Colleen, who was responsible and didn't party, didn't do drugs, and kept him on the straight and narrow.
Within a year, they had a baby girl named Kaya.
Tas says having a child changed him and made him determined to provide for his new family. He devoted himself to skateboarding, but he'd been blacklisted from ESPN and the X Games, who were just running everything now, especially the vert scene. And their hero was Tony Hawk, all American. Not Tuss, who by now was covered in tattoos, cementing his bad boy image.
Danny Way had since devised the mega ramp, an insanely huge structure with a 40-foot tall roll-in leading to a gap jump, and then a quarter pipe. Just crazy. And then, in a huge publicity stunt, he actually jumped over the Great Wall of China on the largest ramp ever constructed, a whopping 65 feet tall.
Soon, the X Games picked up on the mega ramp as well and were featuring one. But to Tuss, a poor kid and self-proclaimed bogan, this looked like something only the privileged could ride, and was counter to his punk rock street ethics and idea of what skateboarding represented.
So Tuss started skating the smaller competitions, earning a tiny fraction of what the pros on the ESPN X Games circuit were making. But there was a purity to it, a down-to-earthiness. He wasn't on a mega ramp in a stadium. They were on normal ramps in normal skate parks, built by normal skaters and performing for normal kids.
Tuss went back to Australia to visit his brother and immediately saw that he was all strung out on heroin, and quickly surmised the problem was his new girlfriend, Lynette, whom he confronted, telling her to stay away from his brother. But Ben defended himself, screaming at his older brother,
"You're off in America having a great time. I'm stuck here. What do you expect me to do?"
"You think I'm having a great time? Fun? It's no fun at all."
Once celebrated world champions, both brothers were now miserable and living on opposite sides of the world.
Then Tuss had another child, a son he named Aiden, and the pressure was really on to support his family. He was constantly away at competitions, which Colleen resented, saying he was no good to her as a father if he was always on the road. But what was he to do? It was the only way he knew to support them. They began to argue bitterly, and the relationship started to fall apart.
At this point, Tuss had broken his back and his femur, torn both his ACLs, nearly blinded himself. He's getting older, is now in his 30s, and he's still pushing himself, still taking hard falls, and still getting injured.
In order to keep going, to kill the pain and get the energy he needs, he starts using methamphetamine. Just a little at first, the occasional snort of crank for motivation. But soon he's smoking the stuff. And just like that, he's back on drugs again. Hard. Smoking crack and meth now. Popping pills to come down.
The fights with Colleen are escalating, and at one point he hits her and ends up in jail for several months. Colleen then got custody of the children and cut off all contact with him.
Just when he thinks he's hit rock bottom, things get worse. Homeland Security shows up at his jail cell and tells him as soon as he's released, he's being deported back to Australia.
Chapter 7. The Murder.
And as Tuss hit rock bottom in the States, so too does his brother Ben in Australia. He and Lynette are now full-on junkies, scrounging for the next fix. Ben is ripping off his friends, and Lynette turns to prostitution to support her habit, which deeply hurts Ben.
As his brother Tuss would say,
He was fully in love, and then she became a prostitute. He was shattered, man. Absolutely gutted. Everywhere they went from that time on, every bloke she talked to, he was like, "Hey, you suck his dick today."
it was around this time that Ben admitted himself to the Alfred Hospital, where he told doctors he was having homicidal and suicidal thoughts. As Tuss says,
He even called the bloody nut team on himself a few times. They said, "Nah, you're all right. And then bang, it all happened.
On March 2nd, Lynette's body was found in the Yarra River, wrapped in Ben's quilt and weighted down with dumbbells in his backpack. Ben told friends he was in a Xanax and heroin blackout when it happened, and couldn't remember anything after waking up on a park bench in a stupor.
And 6 days later, on the 10th of March, the body of Benjamin Pappas was found floating under the pier of the Victoria Dock.
A 2012 coroner's inquest determined that Ben killed Lynette Phillips and then drowned himself after her body was found. A psychologist who treated Pappas before his death noted that he had shown signs of, quote, suicidal ideation, homicidal tendencies, and psychotic-related symptoms such as paranoia, anger, and frustration.
Tas, still in jail, was told by his father that his brother, his best friend, and partner in crime had drowned, which made no sense to him as they'd surfed gnarly waves together. Ben was a great swimmer. Why? Why? How?
He screamed and wept in his jail cell, but there was no bringing his brother back. He was gone forever. He'd later say,
I understand how shit it is, but people have to realize they were in love. No court in Australia would have given him the death penalty. He gave himself the death penalty. He wasn't a true killer. A true killer would just keep killing. He tried to get himself committed. He called me up saying, look, I think I'm gonna do something nutty. And I said, yeah, everyone does, but you don't do it. Everyone has had thoughts about hurting people if they piss you off. But a thought's a thought. They didn't realize how hard the drugs and everything were getting them. Murderers don't kill themselves. They can kill and not give a shit. Ben gave a shit. I don't agree with violence against women. I think it's shit. I've made that mistake myself. I'm ashamed of myself. But the facts are they were two junkies who were in love. It was a Sid and Nancy situation. But I just want to say on behalf of Murder Coaster, we're not defending Benjamin Pappas, just quoting his brother. The murder of Lynette Phillips was a horrible, horrendous thing, and there is no excuse for it. And Tas is wrong. Many murderers take their own lives, including cold-blooded serial killers, like Israel Keyes or Baumeister. We don't sugarcoat killing here. It's horrible and wrong, period.
Chapter 8. Deported.
Well, one day time will die, and love will bury it. Love will bury it. Love will bury it.
In April 2007, Tas was deported back to Australia. He lost his career, his girlfriend and children, as well as his brother. He dyed his hair black and fell into a deep depression.
He says in order to be closer to his brother, he began to do the same drugs, popping Xanax and methadone pills, shooting up heroin, meth, and coke.
And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, on April 4th, 2008, his father, Bill, died of a heart attack.
As he would say,
My dad died a year after my brother died. He just couldn't handle it anymore. He died of a heart attack, but I killed him. I drove the final nail in the coffin for sure. I feel like a piece of shit.
utterly spiraling out of control. In November, he flies to Buenos Aires, Argentina, in a wild stunt to try to pull off what his brother had failed to accomplish: smuggling cocaine into Australia.
It's so bizarre. The two brothers had always pushed each other to pull off crazy stunts. But now, It had progressed from surfing and skateboarding to drug smuggling.
He gets in a taxi and tells the driver he wants to buy $10,000 worth of cocaine. And soon he had 2 500-gram discs of cocaine, each with a scorpion pressed into them.
You know, while it sounds really cool to have scorpions pressed into your drugs, part of me wonders just how sanitary that is. I mean, people are going to be ingesting this shit, putting it into their nasal cavities. It kind of seems really gross to have a dirty insect in there. I don't know.
Yeah, totally gross. Tas goes back to his hotel room where he takes a grinder and turns the discs into powder, then packs it all into crudely hollowed out skateboard decks, covers them with grip tape, attaches trucks and wheels, and wraps them in tape reading, "Fragile."
But he's incredibly sloppy and wired out of his mind. He packs it all loosely and is getting cocaine just everywhere, which he just wipes away with wet paper towels, smearing everything with cocaine residue, and then just heads right to the airport and jumps on the next flight back to Australia.
The plane lands, and he's high out of his mind and covered in cocaine dust as he comes through customs wide-eyed and dumping sweat, carrying a bag with crudely hollowed-out skateboards jam-packed with cocaine.
Chapter 9. Busted. Apparently they have some kind of drug sensors that can actually detect cocaine, and they all start flashing and beeping as soon as he comes into customs. He was cold busted, as, in some part of his mind, he knew he was gonna be. It was kind of like a desperate cry for help in a way.
He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. But as he says,
"It was good for me. I think it was really good for me. I needed to be locked in a cell to think about my brother because I couldn't handle the pain. It was too much at once. Skateboarding was a gift. It saved Ben and me from the life we would have had in St. Albans, but we still got sucked into the life we'd have had in St. Albans anyway."
While in prison, he began to correspond with a woman named Helen. The two fell in love and were granted conjugal visits, and they had a son named Billy. As he says,
"I just needed a strong Australian woman to help me through my shit."
he also found religion, becoming a born-again Christian, and says faith is the rock he'd always been searching for. All the while, he kept skating, practicing freestyle moves in his tiny cell. And on the 12th of December 2012, Tas was released from prison, saying about his life,
"Of course I have regrets. I lost my kids, you know. I wish I had worked out I had a borderline personality disorder earlier in life and got on the right medication. We always were the way we were, you know. A couple of bogans who were attracted to skateboarding. I regret everything, but all I can do is laugh about it. All you can do is laugh. I mean, what are you gonna do? Sit down and cry for the rest of your life?"
And he kept skating, never losing his love for it, and invented a new trick, a kick-flip varial Indy 540 he called the MAYHEM. He'd say,
"I'm loving skating at the moment. Whether or not I'll be welcome at X Games ever again, well, that's another story. But I'll be skating me arse off no matter what."
Today, Tas still skates, still surfs, but he's joined by his son Billy, who's the spitting image of his brother Ben.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the Pappas brothers and the tragic murder of Lynette Phillips.
We do hope you enjoyed it.
A huge thank you to all the amazing musicians and bands who let us use their music this week. Humboldt County Hardcore, Something Wicked. Love those guys. My good friend, Chris Jeffries, the homeless romantic, the serial killer inspired hard rock of A Killing Tradition, Chris Minter and Blasphemo, Chris Chieffo, Blackest Shabos, and surf rock with Time Surfers and The Whole Other, as well as show favorite, the always soulful Halizna. You can find links to all their music in the show notes. Check them out. And hey, you want your band played? Let us know. You got a case you'd like us to cover? Did we get something wrong? You just want to say hi? Drop us a line at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. We will check you later. Thank you so much for listening.